Last month we had Dr. Tim Sherwood from UCSB start this series of talks, and today I'm happy to present Dr. Ryan Kastner, who's also a professor from UCSB. He's an assistant professor in the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering at UCSB, and he got his PhD from UCLA in 2002.
Thank you.
And his master's from Northwestern, right?
Yes, Northwestern.
And he's going to talk today. He's on our research team, and some of you are perhaps going to be doing research in this area. But he's going to be talking about reconfigurable hardware security, which is sort of the uncharted territory in the world of security. At least that's what our reviewer said. It's a place that needs a lot of work, and so we're going to get started doing some of it.
Okay, thank you, Cynthia. It's a pleasure to be here. It's always nice to come up the coast and visit Monterey, although Santa Barbara is also a beautiful place as well. So what I'm going to talk about today is this idea of reconfigurable hardware. I'll go over a lot of overview on that. I'm not sure how familiar you are with reconfigurable hardware. Usually that's more of a kind of an EE or CE type topic. So you guys are, I guess, in CS. So if I go too slow, let me know. If you need to ask questions, of course, let me know, because the first part will be kind of like a tutorial on reconfigurable hardware. And then I'll start talking about some security issues. Really, there's not that much going on in terms of security for reconfigurable hardware. It's really just an afterthought. There are some companies, smaller companies, Actel, that kind of jumped on the security bandwagon just because their chips are pretty secure. And I'll talk about those kind of chips. They're anti-fuse FPGAs. But the major companies like Xilinx, Altera really haven't done much in terms of security, just because really people don't really want security, at least yet, on their chips. They're not too worried about that. So I'll talk about some attacks that we can do, some physical attacks, some generic attacks. Actually, the first FPGA virus, at least according to this paper that has been written like 5 years ago. And then some things we can do with FPGAs to make them more secure. So what they've been doing at Xilinx, what some of our ideas are in this grant that we just got, NSF grant. So it's pretty preliminary. So give me about a year. Hopefully there'll be a lot more charts and graphs. There aren't that many charts and graphs in this, which is kind of odd for a talk. Usually have a lot of here are my results. But since we're just starting this up, there's a lot more ideas. So I'd be interested, please like I said, feel free to stop me, ask me questions. I'm very interested to hear what's coming on from the security side, and I'll try to fill you guys in on the reconfigurable hardware side. And as we mesh, maybe we can come up with some good problems and questions there. So you start off, what is reconfigurable hardware? Okay, so you start off, what is to reconfigure? What does it mean to reconfigure? So if you look in the Merriam-Webster dictionary, you get configure, to set up an operation, especially in a particular way, and to do this over and over again. So that's kind of what reconfigurable hardware is. Basically a generic computing structure, or a circuit level computing structure that we can program is what it is. So very low level, we can program it just like we can program a processor, but we also get some of the spatial parallelism. So we can do a lot of things in parallel, which a processor really can't do very well. So we get kind of the benefits of hardware. We get to do things in parallel. Things are done, computed very spatially, and we also have that programmability of software. So that's what they always say. That's the first thing you'll hear. What is so great about reconfigurable hardware? Well, it gives us the benefits of hardware and software, flexibility of software. So we start off, where did this come from? Right, so we can trace this back to the 1960s to some work done at my alma mater, UCLA, by a professor there named Gerald Estrin. So the Estrin name may be familiar to you. He has a daughter who is there now, Deborah Estrin. She's very big in sensor networks. She's got a huge NSF center there. So that is his daughter. Thelma, actually. Thelma, Deborah's mother, Gerald's wife, is also a professor emeritus at UCLA as well. I'm not quite sure what she did research on. But anyway, what Gerald Estrin did research on, this is back in the 60s. He said, someone came to him with the idea of, okay, we have these processors, and people are starting to push processors in a certain way. So and it seems like everybody's converging in a certain way onto these processors. Can you come up with a new way of thinking about how we compute and do something different? We want to just break out of the mold here a little bit. You're in academia. You're allowed to kind of think outside the box. What would you do if DARPA, which they gave him a bunch of money, how would you do things differently? So what he came up with was, okay, we have this kind of fixed processor. We have these fixed CPUs, and they do fixed instructions, right? They do our adds, our multiplies, so on and so forth. So what if we can have something that's separate that can customize to the circuit or customize to the thing at hand? Okay, so his idea is, okay, we have some fixed stuff. We use this to do what we normally use it to do, control flow applications, general purpose applications. But we also have an extra thing on the side here, this configurable circuits that can specialize towards the application. So if we have like an image processing application, we can come in here and say, wow, let's put this on the specialized thing. Image processing applications do a lot of pixel manipulation. So we can run a lot of things in parallel. We have little parallel things, and they're actually, what he built was these little devices, and they hooked up with wires, and he had a big switchboard, so it looked like a big telephone box almost, right? So he had his coprocessor, then he had this big switchboard, which is a bunch of wires, and these little configurable elements that just did little bits of computation. Okay, and they're actually like physical things you can play with about this size of this big. So what if we can take those, customize it to the thing at hand? Can we get anything better? Okay, and he called this the fixed plus variable structure compiler. The fixed part is like your processor. The variable structure is like your reconfigurable hardware. So this is really ahead of its time, right? This is way before we had enough transistors to do anything, to put this all on one chip. You know, we could only put, I don't know how many transistors on a chip at that time, not that many. So now we start to move, right? We start moving on. I say, okay, Moore's law is going, right? We're getting more and more transistors. What more can we do? So SRAM's idea kind of just sat there for 40-some years. Okay, 30, 40-some years, about 30 years. And then what kind of came in its place was these ideas of PLAs, PALs. So we have one-time programmable logic, right? So we have an AND array that feeds into an OR array, and we can program these by blowing fuses at the connections, right? So if we want to do some kind of computation here, we blow the fuse here, blow the fuse here, and we get some sort of logical computation. The problem here, one-time programmable, right? And again, these things are kind of small, right? We're getting more transistors on a chip, but not a lot more transistors. So we're still getting the things where we can do some computation on the chip, but not a lot of computation on a single chip. So what these were nice for is customize, right? The consumer can customize whatever he wants. So what happens is some company makes a bunch of these, mass produces these things, takes all the cost of making these, right? It costs now $1 billion to fab something. So what company can absorb all that cost is essentially what Xilinx and Altera do now. They make these custom chips, absorb all the cost, and then distribute them cheaper, $10 to you. You can customize them. You still can kind of program them. You don't have to pay all this upfront cost in order to make a custom chip, and you're still getting some of the advantages of hardware, right? If you did this in software, you'd have to do AND operation, OR operation. It would be 32 bits, 16 bits, whatever. You wouldn't get the parallelism. You wouldn't get the ability to execute this as fast as you could do it in hardware if you just customize and blow those fuses. So the problem there, again, is that it's one-time programmable. It's not re, right? It's configurable, but we don't have that re on it yet. Right? So come to about the mid-'80s, and that's when Xilinx Altera started as companies, pretty much mid-'80s, 83, 84. And they kind of just took these ideas of PLAs and keep extending them. We're getting more transistors, now I can keep putting more and more on the chip. Okay? And in about 84, 85, the idea of an FPGA came along. So this is a field programmable gate array, FPGA. And also CPLDs, complex programmable logic devices. Okay, so these are PLDs. CPLDs are just a little more complex. And the nice thing about the FPGA, the big thing is that we can reprogram it. So instead of having fuses at each one of these little points, we're going to have programming bits. We're going to have SRAM bits, and we're going to have pass transistors. So if you want to turn it on, you put the SRAM bit as 0, the transistor is closed. Okay? If you want to turn it off, you want to turn it on, put it as 1, transistor opens, now you have a circuit. Okay? So it's like a programmable fuse. And this is kind of what FPGAs started as. Just bigger ones, they were usually just glue logic, things you can sit on buses and do address calculations. They were used initially a lot for ASIC prototyping. So we want to run ASICs. It's very expensive to make them. We want to make sure they run. So we have this code, we have this VHDL. Let's first put it on an FPGA, see if it runs as expected, put it in our system. Okay, it's working, seems to be working pretty well. Now we can actually go send it to the fab, spend $1 billion in order to get our custom chip. Right? So this is all because of we're getting more and more transistors. Right? So as we continue to get more and more transistors, so we go from 1980, when these things were just glue logic, they were just used for prototyping, till now we have exponentially more transistors. We can do a lot more on the chip. Right? So if you look at modern FPGA, modern reconfigurable device, so this isn't even modern yet. This is like 3 or 4 years ago. So now they have Vertex 4. They skipped Vertex 3. I don't know what happened to Vertex 3. But they're on Vertex 4. They just released that earlier this year, so it's even bigger. So think about times 4 to all of this. And you get approximately what a modern FPGA is now. So you have a ton of logic cells, right? 100K logic cells. You even have little RISC cores on them. So little mini processors, not even mini processors, little processors, 4 of them on the chip. You have memory hierarchy. You have these little RAMs, SRAM RAMs, that are distributed across all the chip. You can hook them up to external memory. You can use them for network processing, all kind of ideas. So now these things aren't just glue logic. They're kind of the center of your board. So if you look at boards, 20 years ago you had processor, you had FPGAs as glue logic on the side. Now you look at boards for networking or for signal processing, you'll see FPGA right in the center. They do everything. They're the controller. Okay. So this is going back to why are these good, right? So traditionally we didn't have this ability to do reconfigurable hardware. We had the ability to do something in hardware or the ability to do something in software. Okay, and those were our choices. So if we want to do something in hardware, what do we get? We get extremely fast performance. Okay, why do we get fast performance? Well, if we do something like ax squared plus bx plus c, we can do everything spatially, right? We can do 2 multiplies at the same time. Whereas theoretically, in processor, we do this sequentially. We do 1 multiply, then we do another multiply. Right? Here we can do however much parallelism we need 1,000 multiplies. We're doing some signal processing. We need 1,000 multiplies at once. We can configure the FPGA to do 1,000 multiplies at once. Right? You can't do that on the software. With hardware, you can do that. Okay? And you do exactly what you need. You don't have extra control logic. This does exactly what it is. This is always going to be X. Doesn't have a choice to be any of your 32 registers. This is always X. This is always B. This is always C, and so on. So you don't need extra control logic here. A lot of the overhead that you get with processors. So this is always, hardware is always going to be the fastest. If you design it well, it's always going to be the fastest possible you can get, the lowest power, the best in terms of everything, in terms of performance, right? You can't beat this. Even FPGAs, you can't beat. You take an FPGA, take a design, put it in FPGA, put it in hardware, put it in an ASIC. Your ASIC is always going to be 10 times faster, 100 times faster than your FPGA. That's just a fact of life. But the problem is, these are expensive, right? These are more expensive now. $1 billion, $4 billion in order to fab a custom chip. There's no way that small companies can afford this. Only Intels, AMDs can afford to do that now. Yes?
I'm not familiar with the term glue logic.
Glue logic is just, I have this chip, they need to interface somehow. I'm going to stick something in there in order to interface. So something that sits on a bus usually interfaces with, so for instance, you may have a memory controller. You can call that glue logic. So I have my processor, some memory controller, and I have my memory. So initially that's just small things, just because FPGAs, they weren't big enough to do anything more complex. Okay, so the main thing, hardware fast but inflexible, right? So we can think about this being fixed at fabrication. Once you say, here's what I want, here's how the mask looks like, I'm done. I can't change that. If I come out and say, okay, I have a bug in my hardware, refabricate. Okay, that's the problem with hardware. So software, great thing, right? Flexible. The computation is fixed at runtime. The computation is fixed when we say, here's the instruction that you should execute. Okay, that's when it's fixed. And it's very flexible. Problems, right? So this is a good thing. Bad thing, it's somewhat slow, or slow. Essentially sequential, right? Essentially we're doing one thing at a time. So before we could do the 2 multiplications in parallel, now we have to do them one at a time. Okay. There's a lot of overhead in terms of interpreting instructions, right? We have these big instruction caches, we have registers, places to store instructions, we have all this control logic in order to get data out of registers. So there's a lot of just control overhead in processors, which essentially make them slow. Another thing is that they're made for the general case, right? So they're made for 32 bits. But if we use 8 bits, well, maybe we can use MMX or something like that, but we're still pretty much stuck with 32 bits. Okay? If we want to use 6 bits or 12 bits or some weird thing, we can't do that on a processor. In hardware, on FPGA, we can say, okay, here's a 12-bit adder. You can go ahead and do that. Whereas software, it's, 32-bit adder. We have to use that 32-bit adder. All right. So reconfigurable hardware, of course, takes both of them, right? Or else I wouldn't be talking about this. You have spatial parallelism. You can instantiate up until the size of your chip as many of operations as you want. Your control circuitry is, at least at the higher level, at the RTL level, is much simpler. You do exactly what you do. You don't have big register banks that you have to go through. If you need 5 registers, you have 5 registers. You don't have 32 registers and so on. And you can program it. So you can say, now I want to run this application. 5 seconds later, I want to run this application. So I can change that. Of course, nothing is free, right? So what are you losing here? Well, essentially what you're doing is you're saying, I want to go, you have kind of a spectrum. You have your ASIC down here, fixed at fabrication time. You have your instruction here, fixed at whenever you say, or the processor, it binds whenever it says, here's the instruction. Now you have something a little bit lower that says, I'm going to bind whenever there's a logic element. And I'll try to make that a little more clear in a second. But you have a lot of things in terms of interconnect. And you're going to see FPGAs are just totally interconnect, like 90% interconnect. And that's because we're working at a smaller level. So we're programming gates now instead of programming functional units. Okay? And since we want to program gates, we need a lot more options of where we should go. Can we go over here? Can we go over here? We have to build the FPGA so that it can have all these options. And one of the biggest things is that it takes a long time to write an application in an FPGA. It's essentially like the same process of writing an application in an FPGA as it is to make the hardware for it. Okay, so compilation is really slow. Whereas you can write a C program, run it on a processor, can't do that. You have to take the C program, change it to Verilog, change it to VHDL, compile it, cross your fingers, hopes that it actually compiles and you don't have any errors and you don't run out of space, so on and so forth. So you pretty much have to be a hardware designer in order to do FPGAs. Okay, so what are we getting out of it? Pretty huge performance benefits. These are basically coming on very data-intensive computations or applications. So up to 100 times versus processor. Like I said, you can't beat an ASIC. So depending on the application, FPGAs are 10 to 100 times worse than an ASIC. But no one can beat an ASIC. And you get big benefits on, these are some of the applications that you get, pattern matching, data encryption. Anything that has a lot of parallel operations, you're going to get benefits over a microprocessor. Okay, so this is what I was trying to poorly explain earlier. So how do we classify reconfigurable architecture? We call these programmable architectures. Reconfigurable, programmable, pretty much the same term, just different communities use them in different ways. Right? So over here, we bind, this is when we bind things, or how we can look at things. What can we program? Okay, so this is an FPGA. What can we program at the FPGA? Well, we can program individual gates. Okay, I'll show you how we program these individual gates. So we can make a bunch of gates that do exactly what we want to do. Okay, when we get somewhere like here, so this is kind of like a processor. This is probably you call a processor. So what can we program a processor? Well, we can program the functional units. We can say, do an add, do a multiply. But these things are somewhat fixed. Up here, these are more kind of coarse-grained architectures where you have maybe an array of processors. And here, what can you program there? You can say, well, do this process on this processor. Okay, you can maybe think of this as systolic array type thing. So, okay, so what do we have here? So how do we program it? We program it at the bit level. So we have bits. Here we program it bytes. We say, okay, do this. Operands. Okay, basic unit of computation is Boolean operation. Like I said, a gate, arithmetic, functional operation. So this is more coarse-grained. Right now we're doing functions and programs, communication, so on and so forth. So how does this work? So as we go that way, we get more flexible. Right? FPGAs are probably the most flexible. So worse performance coming this way. So we got a lot of overhead here in order to make these flexible. Right? So basically, performance and flexibility are opposite. The more flexibility you get, less performance you have. Okay? So we have a lot of overhead to make these extremely flexible. We're not going to get great performance out of them. Power consumption, same thing. It gets worse because we have that overhead. And design complexity gets worse the higher level you go. So just think about designing for an FPGA, designing in hardware, designing in Verilog, as opposed to designing for a processor where you design in C code. Okay, so this is a pretty interesting picture comparing FPGA on the left and a processor on the right. Okay, so we have the orange, which is your interconnect, and then we have the green, which is just memory, and then we have the purple or bluish, whatever that is your processing elements. Okay, so we look at the processor. Everybody's probably pretty familiar with what a processor looks like. So we have a lot of instruction memory. All right, this is where instructions are stored. We have a register bank. Right, this is a register bank. So here we store our data, our operands, and then we have interconnect related to getting these registers connected to our ALUs. So this is essentially our ALUs right here. And then this is our control logic. So these are approximately to scale. So you can see we have a lot of instructions, a lot of control, a lot of data in here. Now I'll go to an FPGA. So what do we have? One thing you can see is that FPGA is very regular, right? We take a tile and we replicate it 1,000 times. So what do we have in each tile? We have a tiny little processing element. We have some memory, and we got a ton of interconnect. Right? So 90%, approximately 90% of it is interconnect. The area is interconnect, and we'll see why. Basically more flexible, right? We're making these things smaller. So if we want to connect from here to here, we may want to connect from here to here. We may connect here to here, here to here, here to here, so on and so forth. We have to have a lot of interconnect in order to allow that flexibility to connect kind of anywhere you want to go. Okay, so this is kind of what an FPGA looks like, very high level. And I'll go kind of explain this bit by bit through the next slides. Basic idea is you have CLB, configurable logic block. In here is where you have all your logic. That's where you do your computation. And then all this other stuff is routing, is interconnect. So how do I get from one computational block to another computational block? Well, I go through what's called a routing channel. This is a switch box, so this allows me to go anyway. I can come in here, go up, go this way, that way, go all directions, so on and so forth. And you can see all these little guys are what are programming bits. Okay, so we have a lot of programming bits. We're going to say, okay, this can connect this way, that way, so on and so forth. So FPGAs are a lot of just SRAM bits, a lot of programming bits. So let me go through, well, there's an actual picture. It's hard to see. But you can see what you want to show here is it's just very regular. Right? You look at a processor, you'll see like little parts you can go, oh, okay, right there is instruction cache. Oh, right there is data path. Right there's control unit. Here, it's all the same. Can you see it? Yeah, a little better, right? Yes?
Can you go back one slide?
Sure.
This programming bits you call, is that the equivalent of that glue logic you were talking about earlier? That's allowing these CLBs to enter?
So when I talked about glue logic, I meant the whole FPGA is used as glue logic. So you take a device and you put that FPGA as glue logic.
So scaling that concept, though, are these logic bits acting as, on a smaller scale, glue logic between all these CLBs then? Allowing them to,
they allow them to communicate.
Assimilate it into the bigger...
Kind of, yeah. They allow them to communicate with each other. So these are all here just to allow this guy to communicate to any other guy.
And each of these CLBs is optimized for a different purpose. They're not all homogeneous.
They're all the same, actually.
They're all the same?
Yeah, they're all the same. But you'll see the programmable, we'll get into this. So if you wait for about 5-10 minutes, hopefully your questions will be answered. All right. Okay, so this is kind of how it starts, the most basic. So we have these logic elements. I won't tell you exactly what these logic elements are yet. But these logic elements do some computation, and they do some gate level computation. So these logic elements could be an AND gate, could be an OR gate, XOR, could be something a little bit more complex. Pretty much what a logic element can do at this point, take any 4-input logic function and implement it. Okay, so any 4-input logic function, 1 output. 4-input, 1 output, I can do it there. I'll show you how to do it. Use a lookup table to do that. And then you have your configurable interconnect. Okay, so these are configurable. These are also configurable. Your interconnect is configurable. So if I want, this is an AND gate, this is an OR gate, I want to do AND OR, I say go here, connect down, go into, this is kind of like a switch box, go down, now I'm in my channel, go over that way. Okay, so that's how I connect gates together. All right. So the major computation is a lookup table. Okay, this is what does the computation. So I started here with the simplest lookup table, a 2-input lookup table. So here I have 2 inputs, 1 output. This allows me to do any type of 2-input function that I want. Okay? So what I do is I have my inputs, and then I have some internal state. internal configuration. Okay, these are my configuration bits. So I have n inputs. I need 2 to the n state bits in order to do any function, right? 2 inputs, 2 to the 2, 4 configuration bits. Okay, and then I just program these configuration bits to my outputs. Okay, so here I would say 0, 0. I want 0 to come out. So this is 0. 0, well, it doesn't. 0, 1. I want 0 to come out. This is also 0. 1, 0. 1, 0 to come out. This is also 0. 1, 1. 1 out. So on and so forth. So I can just change these things. 1, 1, 1, 0. Or no, sorry. 0, 1, 1, 1, OR gate. Right? 0, 1, 1, 0, XOR. So you can see I can do any function. So this allows me to do any 2-input function. Okay, so that's the power of that. So you can generalize that from 2 to k, right? So I have a k input lookup table, and right here we got a for LUT. We call these LUTs. So we can do any 4-input, 1-output function. Okay, and we need 16 bits in order to store that. 2 to the 4, 16. We can do 2 to the 2 to the n different functions. Right? So we can have lots of different types of functions. And continue building onto this. So we have our lookup table. Now we can say, okay, I want to store something. I want to have some state. I'm going to put a flip-flop there. Okay, so if I want, I can have that state. If I don't want to, I just go around it. Okay, so now this is starting to build up to what these logic blocks are, these configurable logic blocks. So lookup tables are a part of these configurable logic blocks. And you can see here I have 16 bits configuration data for each lookup table. If I put a register, if I put a flip-flop there, now I have another bit here saying, should I put it in there? Should I latch the data in there, or should I bypass that data? Okay, so we got 17 bits. And then we connect this to interconnect. Interconnect is going to have a lot of bits. So you can see we're getting a lot of bits, a lot of context that we have to store on these chips. Again, flip-flop, a lookup table, possible flip-flop. See, here's our configuration bit. Either store it, don't store it. Now we're getting into here's our channel. So what we do on our channel is we say, okay, this output can connect to any one of these tracks, any one of these tracks in our channel. The way we do that is we put a pass transistor here, and then we put an SRAM bit on that pass transistor. Right? So if this is 1, this is open, this is connected. So this track is connected here. Same here. If this is open, this is connected. Closed, it's not connected. So you can see how we're starting to build up how we can implement logic in these gates and on an FPGA. And then this is very simplistic, actually, even though it looks kind of complicated, CLB. So this is CLB from about 15 years ago, one of the first. So we got here, lookup table, 4-input lookup table, just like I explained. We got 2 of them. Then we got another lookup table here, 3 inputs. Okay, then we got a bunch of ways to select. Okay, so our inputs are G4, 8, plus a clock. Anything else? These are configuration inputs. So where do we route these things? Should this guy go into this flip-flop? Should it go down into this flip-flop? Should it go straight through? Should it go into this logic function, into this logic function, so on and so forth. So the key things here are the lookup tables, the muxes just to control the routing, which way we go from our outputs of our lookup tables to the outside world, and our flip-flops, 2 flip-flops. Okay, so this is logic, and we can store some data here. So this is one of those blocks. There's a picture of the box. There we go. This is one of the blocks. And then these things are even more complex today. So like I said, this is 15 years old. Now they're a lot more complex. But that's the general idea. They're generally lookup tables, muxes, flip-flops. Generally what's in your CLBs. Okay, so now let's talk about the interconnect. So you kind of have an understanding of what's going on in that CLB. That's just your local logic, your computation. Okay. Now we have to connect all these guys together in order to make a much bigger application, right? We're just talking at the very gate level. So we have to connect all these gates together in order to make a logic adder, and use that adder in a larger thing, so on and so forth. Okay, so how do we do this? We have these channels, and then we have these switch boxes or switch matrices. Okay, so if we come out, we want to connect into here. We just program these switch matrices in order to get them connected. And what we'll do is we have, so kind of the most basic one is you just have very regular switch boxes. If you want to go 5 away, you have to go through 5 switch boxes. Nowadays, we have much longer interconnects. So we have fast interconnects. Say, OK, if you want to go 4-way, use a special interconnect. I don't have to go through 3 switch boxes. Because anytime you go through these things, lots of power, lots of delay. Okay, so the chip is 90%, like I said, interconnect. And also everything that you try to get out of it, how fast can it go? Well, 90% of how fast it's going to go is how fast you can get through the interconnect. 90% of the power is how much power the interconnect is using. So you want to try to optimize this interconnect as much as possible because it's your bottleneck. So how does a switch box work? So again, we have these tracks coming in, tracks going out, and then we have these programming points. Okay? So we want to go from this track to any of the track number 1 on, what is it, the west side, to the north, to the east, to the south. We want to be able to go anywhere. Okay? So if we want to go up, program this switch right here. Okay? This is a 1. Everything else is a 0. Now we go up. Right? So we got like an L shape, like this. Okay? If you want, this is a T shape, so we may want to connect 3 things, right? We may want to connect this guy coming in, and it wants to go this way, and this way. Right? To do that, program this, program this. Is that it?
That's all.
That's all. Yes. Okay. And then we need all these transistors in order to do any kind of arbitrary different shapes. So go straight through, right? Go up, use this transistor. Do an L, backwards L. Do a normal L, we use that transistor. To do T's, so on and so forth. So this allows us to do any type of shape, any type of connection. And you can see each one of these, right? So transistor, SRAM cell. So how many transistors in an SRAM cell? Like 6, right? So this is like 6 times this. It's getting pretty big. So this definitely is, you're going to see this. It's not going to look like this at all. It's just going to look like a bunch of memory. Right? And then you're going to have your pass transistors.
Are these just 2-dimensional?
Yeah. Yeah. They all look like that first picture I showed. Pretty much like this. You can kind of argue that they're not really. No, you can't. Because like I kind of mentioned that now instead of just going straight here, you can go fast to here. That kind of adds a dimensionality to it, but it's not like 3-dimensional circuits. They are talking about 3-dimensional FPGAs, but no one's made them yet. It's just living in academia right now. Okay, switch boxes, CLBs. This is okay. Whoops, did that work? So this is what I was talking about. So we have single lines, direct connect. So these go right next to your neighbors. These are long lines. They go maybe 6 or 12 away. These are double. They get 2 away. These are here's single. These are 4 away, so on and so forth. Okay. So this is just your channel. Oops. And then this is what it really looks like, part of it. Okay, so you can see the same thing. Direct lines, global lines, these go halfway across the chip. Long lines go like 6 or 12, double, single, go into a switch box. Here's a switch box. So this is connecting a channel going vertically to a channel going horizontally. Here's CLB. So as you can see, like these CLBs, like that first picture, that little cartoon I showed you with the processor versus FPGA, usually it looks like the CLBs are huge, but in essence they're just tiny, really tiny. Everything is just interconnect and SRAM for your interconnect. So that's kind of a basic FPGA. And then what they've started doing more recently is adding a bunch of junk into the FPGA. Okay, so let's put some functional units into it. So one thing they did is they said, well, we don't have, we can do adds pretty quickly. In fact, it's kind of unique. The fastest way to do an add on an FPGA is actually to do a ripple carry add. So you can do CLAs and they're not going to be as fast. And the reason why is they put special logic into the FPGAs to do fast carries. So if you want to do a carry, you go directly to, not through a switch box. Don't stop at go, don't collect $200. Go right next door and don't have to go through that pass transistor, don't have to go through the SRAM. Makes it really fast. So you try to make some kind of carry look ahead adder or something like that. It's going to have to go through all these switch boxes and it's probably not going to be as fast as just a ripple carry adder, which is kind of an interesting consequence of the architecture. So what have they started doing? Multipliers. Multipliers are really slow, right? And we use multiply a lot. So let's put some fast multipliers. So these here are like our CLBs. Now we're going to add some junk to it. Right? So one thing we add is a multiplier. Okay, so this is a fixed multiplier. It's not programmable. Okay? If we want to do a multiply, we do it here. It's an 18-bit multiplier on the vertex. But if we want to do a multiplier, we put it on there, right? Because it's going to be really fast. We don't have to put in this programmable logic. But if we don't want to do a multiplier, it's stuck. We can't change it to anything else. Okay, so we're starting to add some kind of ASIC-like properties into our FPGA. Initially, I don't want to fix anything because it makes it so it's inflexible. Now we're saying we're going to fix some of the things and try to find that bound between flexibility and performance. So we're going to add some more fixed stuff into it, reduce our flexibility, because now we're wasting areas of multiply, right? If we don't need to do 1, 2, what is this, 6 by 6, 6 by 4? If we don't need to do 24 multiplies, we're wasting some of that area for the multiplies. We can't do it for other things. If we just had an FPGA without anything fixed, we can change that logic and do something useful. What else are we adding? We're adding block RAMs, so these are memories. This kind of looks like a Vertex 2, the Xilinx Vertex 2. So the block RAMs there are 18 kilobits. Each one is 18 kilobits. And you can have like 100 to 200 on a chip, on the largest chips. Same thing. So you always have a block RAM, and then you have a multiplier right next to it. So you have 100 to 200 fixed multiplies on your chip. Hard soft processor cores, memory, so on and so forth. So I'm running out of time. This is becoming FPGA talk and not a security talk. So let me jump ahead. This is Vertex 2 Pro. So this is actually Vertex 3. But this is why they skipped to Vertex 4. They called this Vertex 2 Pro, and then the marketing guys got involved and said, next one can't be Vertex 3 because that was Vertex 2 Pro, so let's go to Vertex 4. Anyway, you can see we have these power PCs. We got 4 of them. Fast I/O. What else? Here's the logic cells. These little strips are your block RAMs and your multipliers. So you can see they're evenly distributed. Block RAM multiplier, evenly distributed. Power PCs. Now you can get up to like 8. The Vertex 4 might even have more than 8 power PCs on it. So lots of multipliers, lots of logic cells, lots of memory, even processors. So this is a multi-processor system. This is Stratix, just to make sure that I don't favor Xilinx over Altera. They look a little bit different, but still pretty regular. The major difference is that they have different size memories. So they have these smaller memories, they have these intermediate memories, then they have these mega RAMs, right? These big boys. So it makes things a little bit more interesting for mapping, for how do you partition your application over this as opposed to Xilinx, but very similar. So all these interconnect, all these logic are pretty much the same. They're lookup table based. They're different, and then there are subtle differences, but at the high level, they're basically the same. So how do we program the FPGA? Right? So what we do is we serially feed in all of these bits that we need to tell the FPGA what to do. So what are all these bits? We need to tell the lookup tables, what functions should they implement? We need to tell the switch boxes, which direction do you want this interconnect to go? We need to tell the muxes, which way to route these signals? What else? Am I missing anything? No, that's about it. So lots of configuration data. So like 20 megabytes configuration data. So you can kind of compare that to an instruction, right? Instruction tells your processor exactly what to do at that one time. What, 32 bits, 64 bits. To tell FPGA exactly what to do at one time, 20 megabytes, 30 megabytes, a lot, right? So that's the flexibility, right? You can kind of quantify a flexibility in terms of how much do I need to program it. So you can see that the FPGA is, 64 or 20 megabytes divided by 64 times more flexible than the processor, in some sense. So the main difference, at least in terms of security, is how we configure this. What kind of technology do we use to configure these FPGAs? And there's different types of technology out there. There's antifuse, where you just program it once. So this is just configurable, not reconfigurable. We blow the fuse or we don't blow the fuse, and based on that, the circuit's open or closed. Okay, we have SRAM. Okay, we have six cell transistors. We program into 0, 1, put it past transistor, make sure whatever you want to do, you do that. Program into the SRAM. And we have flash, or we have floating gate. So EEPROM, flash, most people call it flash. So this is, it's non-volatile, which is nice, right? If you turn off the FPGA, it'll remember what happened. But it's also reprogrammable, which is a nice intermediate thing. Antifuse, non-volatile, right? You turn it off, it'll remember it, but you can't program it again. SRAM is volatile. Turn it off, you lose all configuration. So whenever you power up your chip, you have to feed in all this configuration data. And that's a huge security hole too, okay, as we'll talk about in a second. All right, so how do these actually work? Real quickly, antifuse, opposite of fuse. So they're open until you blow them. And what they kind of look like is you have a little plug. So this is a metal 3, metal 2, and then these guys cross, okay? And then there's a via here. And basically, you can program this via to connect or not connect. So you have tungsten plug here. This is silicon dioxide. You have a little bit of silicon here that's isolating this gate. And what you do in order to program it is you just put a lot of current through this, put a lot of voltage through it, and it'll bust on the corner there. Okay, and that's how you program it. Okay, this is 2 antifuses. Okay, so slice, cross-section is sliced. So you can see here's the plug, here's metal 3, here's the silicon, here's blown. So kind of hard to tell, right? This is blown, not blown, right? So that's a good thing, because what, at least right now, what most people are afraid of in FPGAs are people stealing their bit streams or people stealing their designs. Okay, we're going to load our design in here. We spent, 10 man years or whatever programming this in hardware. We put this design in here. We don't want someone to just be able to go in there and say, oh, here's the configuration. I know exactly what you're doing. You made this great intrusion detection system, right? Someone comes in and says, I'm going to buy one for $5 or $10. Take this. Oh, let's look at the bit stream. Okay, now I know how to do this. Buy 100 these FPGAs, sell them for whatever. Right? So we want to try to hide this bit stream. That's probably the most important thing, is hiding the bit stream, the data in the bit stream, at least currently in security for FPGAs. So these antifuses, really hard to do, right? If you want to see what the bit stream is, what do you have to do? You have to take the chip, break it open, cut it into little slices, right? Take a scanning electron microscope and look and see, wow, is that programmed or is that not programmed? Pretty tough, okay? So that's at least Actel's argument. Actel's a company that makes antifuse FPGAs. That's their argument, that their FPGAs are the most secure. Okay? Problem is that you can't reprogram them. Okay, SRAM, volatile, like I said. You need six CMOS transistors. So you can see it's going to be a lot bigger than this. This is nothing, right? This is not even a transistor. This is a via. Here we need 6 transistors. The nice thing about SRAM is that any standard CMOS process can do SRAM. Okay, if you want to do vias, you have to have some extra junk in there. We have to add that little amorphous silicon in order to make the plug. So it's just a little extra processing. We can't just do it at normal Joe Schmo fab. Great thing about SRAMs is that they're reprogrammable. Bad thing is that they're volatile, right? Floating gates, if you don't know how floating gates work, is you just basically have an extra gate here, and based on what kind of charge is on that gate, it can turn this on or off. So no charge is on here, this acts like a normal transistor. Put some charge on here, this is going to turn your transistor off. You can see that the source is not there. Flash are a type of floating gate. Flash is normally what used. You share the floating gate, and you have like a configuration transistor. So you give up an extra transistor in order to have the floating gate. Sizes, so you can see that SRAM, 6 transistors, flash, approximately 2, not even 2, a little less than 2. So SRAM is about 7 times bigger than a flash. And then flash, the antifuse is about 2 to 3 times smaller than flash. So it's just really tiny. So you can make a comparison in terms of SRAM to antifuse and flash. In terms of speed, power, sizes, reprogrammability, volatility. Okay, so we know all these things, right? The main thing is security. What is more secure? That's what we're going to talk about in all of 5 or 10 minutes now. Hold on, I want to see if I talked about. No, I didn't. Okay, so I just want to talk general hardware issues in terms of security. What are we worried about in hardware security? Okay, so one thing. So these things are just general for ASIC, for processors, for whatever, and they also apply to FPGAs. So one thing we're worried about is what's something called overbuilding. This is probably the easiest thing to do if you're making the chips, if you're making the systems. So what you can do is you can say someone's gonna give me the devices and the information in order to make a system, and what I'll do is I'll just buy extra stuff, and I'll sell them on the black market. I'll sell them in India or in China or wherever, on the street corners in LA, whatever you want to do. And then you make extra money off that, right? Because you don't have to pay any of the cost of designing it. You don't have to pay any of the cost of supporting it. So this is a great deal. Pretty easy to do. Cloning is copying code, duplicating IP. So cloning an FPGA is basically copying the bit stream. So if I can tell what the bit stream is, I can take that bit stream and just program another similar FPGA with it and sell that other FPGA with that design that this person has taken 10 man-years in order to build. Okay. Reverse engineering is similar to cloning, but with a little more knowledge about what's going on. You actually figure out what's going on. With cloning, you just take the device, or you take the bit stream, reprogram another device. You really have no idea what's going on internally. With reverse engineering, you take the bit stream, you look at it and say, oh, this is a 1. That means that you've connected this wire to this wire. Oh, this is a 0. This is a 1. That means this lookup table is configured as an AND. So you actually kind of recreate the schematic from the bit stream. Okay? And then what you can do there is you can kind of hide the schematic. If someone put watermarks initially in their schematics, you can erase those watermarks, put your own watermarks in there. When someone comes along, hey, you stole my device, you say, no, look, I put a watermark in there. That's mine. It's not yours. You can actually change the device, make it look better, using different applications, so on and so forth. Denial of service is an interesting one. So FPGAs usually work in a system, and they're doing something for the system. Right? They're doing some digital communication. They're doing some network processing. So what you can do is you can say, OK, I'm going to take this FPGA and program it so that it puts out just garbage signals and basically renders the whole system feasible. So I can just hijack the FPGA, reprogram it. Now it's putting out garbage. Even worse, it's putting power onto an input that's supposed to be an output, putting charge onto the system, possibly even destroying the system. All right, types of security attacks. This should be known to you guys, I would think. Non-invasive, so you just kind of externally look at the devices. And invasive is you actually, cut off the top. You sand off things. You take pictures. You try to reverse engineer things. Use scanning electron microscopes. Obviously, invasive, you have to have a good amount of money behind you. Right? So you have to be not just a teenage hacker sitting in his room, but you have to be have some money. National lab, maybe NSA or some other evil country national lab. So there's actually a company in Texas, in Dallas, I believe. I'm not sure it's Dallas. It's in Texas, called ChipWorks, and they do this invasive technology. What they do is they'll take the chip, they'll polish off layer by layer, take pictures, and then they have tools that reverse engineer it. So they can figure out what's going on. So it took them like 3 weeks to reverse engineer a 386. Okay, they've done Xilinx FPGAs, they've done Altera FPGAs. Basically, they can do anything. They say there's no problem that's ever had problems with them. It's just a matter of money and time. So they tend to do the bigger things that more people are interested in. So they reverse engineer it, and then they sell you the schematics. So like Xilinx goes there to buy Altera schematics. Altera goes there to buy Xilinx schematics. Yes. And it's all legal. It's all totally legal. So like a Xilinx schematic is something like $20,000. Not that much when you think about it, how much time is put into it. So this is a type of invasive security attack. We have levels of security. This is from an IBM paper in the early 90s. Again, you guys are probably familiar with this. Level 1 is like you're a high school kid. You don't have to do much in order to figure it out. Okay, level 2 is you have some time and some equipment, then you can figure it out. Level 3, you have a lot of time, a lot of people working on it, a lot of money, infinite amounts of money, and then you can break it. Pretty much people try to go for level 2. Right? Yes?
So can these guys go after the Atmel chips that are supposedly designed?
So that's what I was just at a workshop with John McCollum last week. John McCollum is one of the founders of Actel, so the anti-fuse. And he argues that this is extremely hard. It's at least level 3. At least level 3, he says. That you can do it, but you need to, like I said, you need to cut it exactly where it was, like I showed in that picture. You need to take a scanning electron microscope and look at that little, is it blown or is it not blown? And then you need to do this 53 billion times. So it's pretty tough. It's possible, but it's pretty tough.
So with enough time and money.
With enough time. So it's that, like, I think anything is level 3, that's the point, right? With enough time and money, you can do it. But you know,
Quick aside, the Atmel chip is the TPM chip.
that's the, for the, okay, yeah. So they're small, kind of small market. I read an article from interviewing a Xilinx marketing. It was more of a marketing guy, but he says the market for FPGA security is something like, I think 40 billion, I don't know, a year. And you know, if people like Actel want to fool around with that market, then we'll let them, right? So they're just not enough market. But Actel's much smaller; they can go for that market. So they're the ones that have all the rad hard stuff for space, and they're one of the few companies, if you go FPGA companies, that actually have a security website and argue that these FPGAs are more secure than others. So. Okay, types of attacks. We can have a black box attacks. So this is just, here's an input, look at the outputs. Okay, so for small like PLAs, PALs, this is easy, right? Here's an input, what is my output? I can figure out what the function is. For 50 million, 1 billion transistor FPGA systems, this is impossible. Not gonna happen, right? So this black box attacks, you can't really do. Readback attack, this is really easy on most FPGAs. So all this does is says, I have ways in my FPGA to get the bit stream out, and I just read out that bit stream. Really simple. Okay, so Xilinx, you can do this. All their FPGAs, you can just read out the bit stream. Okay, they've started to do things to encrypt them, make them better, but majority of the FPGAs, especially the lower end FPGAs, you can just read out the bit stream if you want it. Okay.
Can you elaborate on what you mean by the bit stream? Is that the flow through that connection?
The bit stream is all those SRAM programs. So it's just like a program for your. It tells the FPGA what to do. So it's like 20 megabytes of data, and each bit says, okay, open or close, essentially. Yes.
But just by knowing, and that's all the connection material for them.
So that tells the connections. So that tells you the interconnect, and also tells you the data, because those lookup tables use SRAM bits to say program this as an AND gate. So if you just look at those, 4 bits, you can say, oh, this is an AND
The
gate.
bit stream then equates to the program for this hardware,
Exactly.
not to the hardware itself.
Exactly.
From a security standpoint, they're not stealing your circuit design, they're
not
stealing one program.
Exactly. They're not stealing your, yeah, exactly right. But that's still hard to do, right? That's what you're making. If you're designing something for an FPGA, you're not designing the FPGA architecture itself, you're designing something to program it. Okay, and you're spending a lot of time on that. So people are they really want to protect that IP. Okay, they really want to protect that bit stream. All right. So some simple things, if I talk about them, they've started encrypting things. The anti-fuse, obviously you can't do a readback attack because it's programmed in, it's burnt in. They've started encrypting the bit streams. So usually what the FPGA has, it has a PROM, and then it's connected to our configuration, our JTAG, and from that PROM stores your configuration. Okay, so all you have to do is sit on that PROM, sit in between the PROM and the FPGA, and you can say, oh, here's the configuration before. Now they've encrypted that. They have a key on the FPGA, so they have an encrypted bit stream in your PROM. You can read that encrypted bit stream, but unless you know the key, you're going to be out of luck. The FPGA itself decrypts the bit stream and programs itself. So that's what they do now in order to make the SRAM a little more secure. And that's the state of the art in SRAM right now. Configuration clones is just what I talked about. If we sit on that PROM, figure out what the configuration is, get it. Physical attacks are much harder. So this is cutting open the chip using scanning electron microscopes. Some interesting things you can do in SRAM. Obviously, any kind of physical attack, if you can do it in ASIC, you can do it in FPGA, right? If you can figure out what an ASIC is, you can figure out what an FPGA is. The thing that makes physical attacks kind of better in FPGAs is that you can look at the FPGA structure itself and say, oh, I know what the architecture is, but that tells you nothing about what the design is on that, because the design is totally made by the bit stream, right? So you can look and say, okay, there's an SRAM cell here, but I don't know if it was 1 or 0. Okay, so it's a little bit, you can argue that it's more secure than an ASIC in terms of physical attacks. Other things you can do in SRAM cells is that SRAM cells burn in, right? So when you program them, initially, especially the first time you program them, a lot of times they'll kind of burn in. There'll be electromigration. The wires will will thin out, electrons will move and migrate to other places. And you can look at that afterwards, turn the power off, and look and say, oh, wow, this is burn in, right? I know that this was a 1, this was a 0, so on and so forth. And obviously you can do the sectioning, the SEM analysis for the anti-fuses, but you can't do that for SRAM. So some workarounds for that is just rotating. So I have a design, now I'm going to rotate it around my chip a little bit. So first it starts off in the corner, now it starts in this corner, and this corner, kind of rotates around. And that way things don't burn in. Okay? Actually, the most important thing is just protecting your key. Right? So if you protect your key, you're all right, because you have that bit stream. But if you get that key, then you're in deep trouble. Because then I can unprogram that bit stream, I can program any bit stream that uses that key. So protecting the key is very important as well. Side channel, running out of time. This is interesting, I'll talk about this. FPGA virus. So since the bit stream determines functionality, we can take that bit stream and actually use it to destroy the FPGA. Okay, so what we can do is we can say, okay, I'm going to drive this as a 1. This output I'm going to drive as a 1. I'm going to connect it to this output that's driving a 0. 1 driving a 0 through an open switch, open circuit. Not good, right? So we do that, and it's allowed, right? Because we have that flexibility to do that. We're allowed to do that. It's possible. So we do that about 40, 50 times. We get a big current, destroy the chip. Okay, so that's one big problem, right? We can load in a bit stream. It can be secure. It can be encrypted. But that bit stream can destroy our chip. Not a good thing. So obviously we need something to look at the bit stream and say, okay, is this a safe bit stream? Will this destroy my chip? Is this behaving well? So we need some sort of bit stream verification. I talked about that. Talked about that. Yeah, good enough. So what I tried to do today was talk a little bit, introduce you to what FPGAs are, what reconfigurable hardware are, argue that they're good things, but they're really bad in terms of security because no one's really looked at them. No one seems to really care too much except for the tiny government that barely buys any FPGAs. But this is an important issue, right? Hardware security is very important. We can blow up our chip, our FPGA. So we can put FPGAs on the Mars Rover, and some bad guy can come in, program it, burn up the chip. Now the Mars Rover is stuck. Okay, or missiles, right? Remember the FPGA on a missile, burn the chip, the missile just goes wherever. So the main thing I argue was that the bit stream is most important. We have to protect that bit stream. Okay, not only for IP, to protect the design, but in order to protect the device, in order to make sure that it's behaving well. Just that is where pretty much all the security lies around. If we can protect that bit stream, then we're doing a pretty good job. Of course, we always have to worry about these invasive attacks, but there's not a whole lot we can do about that. So some ways that we can protect the bit stream is we can use antifuse, flash. These things are a little harder. You can't just read them out, right? SRAM, everybody uses SRAM, so we need to protect this somehow. We need to come up with ways to protect SRAM FPGAs. So the first good start is encrypting the bit stream, decrypting it on chip, but there's also a lot of other things we need to do in order to make these more secure. Okay, with that I'm done. I'll take any questions. Yes?
Can you write these programs for these things that are self-modifying? So I load a program which loads up a different program?
Yeah, so the great thing that FPGAs initially for is that they're reconfigurable. So this was a great academic thing, not such a great industrial thing, right? We were all excited. Oh wow, we can change the circuit while it's doing this self-modifying stuff. So there's this kind of infamous Xilinx device, the 6200 series, that is reprogrammable, dynamically reprogrammable. So if we want to reprogram kind of the FPGAs I was talking about, we have to turn the power off, reload the whole thing. We can't just have something on there that says, okay, just change this part. But the 6200 series, it says, oh, you can change different parts. So while something's running over here, change this part, and no one bought it, except for a bunch of professors doing research. So they don't do that anymore. But now on the Vertex, they do that, just because the bit stream is so large. So you can reprogram columns. So columns are independent. And Xilinx, I talked to some Xilinx guys recently, and they said they're starting to actually use dynamic reconfiguration a lot more in some devices. So the application they used was some sort of network processing, where they change the computation in order to match the data that's coming in. So it's kind of a very academic thing, but I think it's starting to take hold So, and it's very interesting. So it's self-modifying code, right? So they tell you never write self-modifying code for a processor. Just think of doing it on an FPGA, right? It's even worse.